Well, this evening, then we're going to carry on in the Old Testament, or go back to the Old Testament. I think I was Barnabas for a couple of days, weeks. So we're going to go to Exodus. We're going to start the Exodus story. So today is Exodus 1 and 2, or most of 2. So go ahead and get what you need to get, and we begin. I'll let you. You'll have to guess who I am. It'll become evident later, but well, it might not. Probably will. You'll have to guess though. So Exodus chapter 1 and 2 up to verse 8, and it may have gone something like this. Isn't it crazy how life just changes? With no plan on our own, with nothing that we would want it to change to, without our permission, without our control, life just changes. We had a good life. We had a great life, actually. We had a great place where we lived. We had land. We had lots of pasture for our sheep and our cattle. I mean, we did what we wanted to do. We went where we wanted to go. We were free. It was wonderful. Our great uncle Joseph, when he was alive, he was the second highest ruler in all of Egypt. And because of Joseph, our family came to the land of Goshen. And we lived there, and we lived well. And the Pharaoh at that time in Egypt gave us all the land and said, do what you want to do. You're Joseph's family. And so we lived there for a long time. But Joseph and his brothers, that generation passed away, and another generation passed away, and a few more generations passed away, and Pharaoh and his generations passed away, and now we have a new Pharaoh. And he doesn't care about Joseph. He doesn't know about Joseph. He has no idea who he is. He has no memory of Joseph. As long as someone had a memory of Joseph, we were okay. But life changed. This Pharaoh seemed to think that we Israelites were a problem. This Pharaoh seemed to think that we Israelites were more than a problem, but a threat. There was a lot of us. We were probably about as numerous, and maybe more numerous than the Egyptians themselves. And if we weren't as more numerous as the Egyptians at this time, we would have been pretty shortly. Because our nation was growing. And it was growing. And this worried Pharaoh. Pharaoh thought that maybe we would rebel against Egypt and we would take over. Or maybe he thought that we would join the enemies of Egypt and we would fight against Egypt. But whatever the case was, life changed. One day we were just enjoying life like we normally do. And we were outside in the sun and we were attending to our flocks. And all of a sudden, without any warning, without any notice, without our ability to react to anything, the whole entire Egyptian army came with their chariots thundering towards us, and they surrounded the whole land of Goshen. We had nothing to fight with. We had no reason to think we'd have to fight. But that day, everything changed. That day, we went from being our own people, being our own nation, to being, slaves. It was very clear we were no longer allowed to do what we wanted to do and be who we wanted to be. We were slaves. We were made to be slaves of the Egyptians. Oh, some of us tried to fight that, but they just killed us. And they threatened us. And if we didn't show up and do the work they commanded us to do, they would kill our children, they would kill our wives, they would kill us. And many of them did die. But we were now slaves. And so we had to do what they told us to do. And so every day we would wake up before dawn and we would have to go to work. Not work like you think work. We didn't get paid for it. It wasn't an option for us. It wasn't something we could or couldn't do. We couldn't call in sick. We didn't have vacation. We were slaves. And every day from sunrise to sunset, we were working. And they didn't treat us well. We made bricks. We tended fields. We did whatever they wanted us to do. We built roads. We built cities. We built the city of Pithom, and we built Ramses, because Ramses was the pharaoh at that time. And we built whatever city he wanted us to build. And we did whatever he wanted us to do. And we took down whatever he wanted us to take down. It never stopped. It never stopped. We would go and they would use the whip against us, and they'd beat us up, and they would just kill us for sport. The men didn't last very long. And a long life was a curse. It wasn't a blessing anymore. You wanted to die young because it was hard and it was laborious. And you always came home with some sort of mark of the whip on you. See, Pharaoh wanted to get rid of us. He didn't want us around at all. He was trying to work us so hard that our whole nation would just die off. And there'd be no one left. They didn't want us around. But while we were around, they wanted us to do everything they told us to do. They built their cities. They built their nation. But we weren't going to go anywhere. Because Pharaoh didn't know something about us. Pharaoh didn't know who we were. He didn't know where we came from. He didn't know Abraham. He didn't know Isaac. He didn't know Jacob. He didn't know Joseph. And he didn't know our God. He didn't know the promises that God made to us. He didn't know the covenant that he gave to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, to us, the Israelites. And we held on to that hope. And we weren't going to roll over and die. We weren't going to go anywhere. And our nation continued to grow because we knew who our God was. Pharaoh must have noticed that our numbers were not depleting. And he must have been wondering what he was going to do. Because life was hard enough already, but he decided to make it harder for us. Because he wanted to slowly kill us all off. It was a slow genocide of our nation. And so he told the Hebrew midwives, he told them to kill every baby boy that was born to the Hebrews. I had a family. I had a son and I had a daughter. My son was Aaron. My daughter was Miriam. I worried for them. What would happen to my children? Would they live this same life that we're living? Would their life be shorter than mine? Would Pharaoh bring his army and just finally kill us all off and get rid of it altogether? What would happen to my children? And I got to tell you, Aaron was a miracle himself. See, my wife was pregnant during the time that the Hebrew midwives were supposed to kill all the boys. We didn't know if we were going to have a girl or a boy. There was no way to know. But we knew she was pregnant. And we knew there was a chance it could be a boy. We didn't want a midwife in our house. We didn't want to risk a midwife coming in and it was a boy and she'd kill our son. So we decided to have the baby on our own. The time came for the baby to be born. We still didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. How could you tell? And my wife was struggling. And my wife was in trouble. I didn't know what to do. I've never delivered babies. I have no idea. My hands are rough and calloused from bricks. I don't deliver babies. I don't know what to do. So we had no choice. I had to call a midwife. I didn't want to call a midwife. What if this baby was a boy? How would I prevent the midwife from killing my boy? I don't know. There's so many ways the midwife could do it before I even knew what was happening. And my wife wasn't strong enough. She wouldn't be able to stop her. Oh, but I had no choice. I couldn't lose my wife. So we called the midwife. We called for Shiphrah. She was one of the midwives. And she came in the door, and our eyes met, and she must have seen the fear in our eyes. Not only the fear that my wife was having trouble having a baby, but the fear of wondering, is it going to be a boy? And is she going to kill my son? Shiphrah, before I could say anything, must have known what we were thinking. It was pretty obvious. And Shiphrah assured us that she would do everything to make sure my wife lived and made sure the baby lived. But even if it's a boy, she said she would make sure the baby lived, even if it was a boy. I don't know if she was telling the truth or not. It looked like she was from her eyes and the way she said it. And so she did what she was supposed to do, and I stayed right there. And the baby started coming. And before I could get over there, before I could even tell if it was a girl or a boy, Shiphrah said, "It's a boy." And my wife cried out, "No!" Because we thought Shiphrah was going to kill him. But Shiphrah gently brought our son out and cleaned him up and did what she does and presented our son to us. Who could have thought that would happen? Why would Shiphrah do that? We asked her. We said, "Shiphrah, this is a boy. You were commanded by the Pharaoh to kill all the baby boys. Why did you let our son live?" The life of our son could be the death of her. Why would she risk her life for us? Why, Shiphrah, would you defy the Pharaoh? And Shiphrah said this. Shiphrah said she would rather defy the Pharaoh than defy the living God. She said that she would rather take the risk of following her faith. She would risk the consequences of following her faith in God over the consequences of maybe losing her faith by not following God. And so all the midwives defied Pharaoh. And all the midwives displayed their incredible faith to us as a nation. And we knew God lived. We knew our sons would live. And we knew our nation would survive. And you know, the most amazing thing happened. Because you need to know something about Shiphrah and Puah and many, if not most, of the midwives in those days. None of them had their own families. None of them could have families. I know it's ironic that the midwives were women who couldn't bear children, yet they were helping us bear children. But Shiphrah and Puah, they were barren. They wanted families. They were married, but they couldn't have children. And because they took a faith-filled risk in God, they had families. They had daughters. They had sons. They had families because they followed God in faith. And our nation was saved. And so we continued to grow as a nation. We continued to add to our numbers, and Pharaoh didn't know what to do. And so he made it harder for us. Because he was still determined to kill our nation. He was still determined to get rid of us. And so Pharaoh made a decree. Pharaoh made a decree to the whole land of Egypt. He said to all the Egyptians, he said, Egyptians, it is legal to kill any baby boy that's born from the Israelites. If you find a baby boy that is born from the Israelites, you can take that baby boy and throw him into the Nile, be eaten by crocodiles. I can tell you that there were a lot of fat crocodiles in those days. We had a lot of crocodiles in the Nile because there's a lot of food source. People tried to hide. People tried to conceal their babies, but there were gangs of Egyptians. And these Egyptian gangs would come into the neighborhood, and they would patrol the neighborhood, and they would look and search out pregnant women. And when they knew their women were pregnant, they would just watch and wait. And when they knew the babies were being born, they'd charge into the house. And we couldn't do anything. They'd bring the soldiers with them. Some would try to fight, and they would just die. And they would bring the soldiers, and they'd take those baby boys, those newborns, and they would throw them into the Nile, where they would drown, and they were crocodile food. We had a problem because my wife was pregnant again. We didn't know if it was going to be a boy or a girl. There's just no way to tell. It was all up to God whether it was a boy or a girl. And so we made a decision that my wife would not go out of the house. She decided to hide. And of her whole time of pregnancy, she did not go out of the house. We didn't want anybody to see her pregnant. Oh, our neighbors knew. Any Israelite in our neighborhood would know. We all tried to help each other. We were all having children. We were all so glad when they were girls. And it was hard when it was a boy, because you could hear the wailing in the houses, and you knew what was happening. You knew if it was a boy or a girl by the amount of wailing that went on, and not in a good way. And it was a sad time in Israel. As the pregnancy went on and drew towards the time of her giving birth, we were scared. I wasn't going to call a midwife, because if a midwife came, everybody would know we're going to have a baby. So one of the neighbors came over. Was it going to be a boy or a girl? And the pregnancy went well, and the delivery went well. And unfortunately, it was a boy. Can you believe I have to say that? Don't you normally, when you have children, celebrate? Don't you normally say, it's a boy or it's a girl? But not us. The worst possible outcome was a boy. Because all that was going to happen was our heart would be ripped from us. How life had changed from celebration to this. We were hiding. It was a bad thing to have a baby boy. Well, we tried to hide our boy as long as possible. Have you ever tried to hide a baby? One that cries? One that makes noises? When you've got to change diapers? When you have more garbage in the house? You have more stuff in the... How do you hide? The neighbors helped us. Our family helped us. When my wife wasn't holding the baby, I was holding the baby. When I wasn't holding the baby, Aaron would hold the baby. Miriam would hold the baby. It was a 24-hour deal. Don't let the baby down, because if the baby starts crying, that could be the end of our baby. It was the most pampered baby ever. And we had a lot of close calls. When we couldn't get our baby to stop crying and someone would hear, the neighbors would purposely poke their baby girls to get them to cry for us. And those squads would come and they'd say, we hear crying. And our neighbors would say, it's my daughter, it's my daughter. But we knew it was only a matter of time. How many parents purposely make their babies cry? What a crazy world. We were afraid to have baby boys and we made our baby girls cry. Life wasn't supposed to be that way. 3 months went by. And we knew we couldn't keep it up. We knew that we had so many close calls that someone was going to catch on. What were we going to do? All it took was one mistake. All it took was one cry before it could be covered up. And in comes the squad, and our little baby boy is in the Nile. So my wife and I decided to take a risk. A faith-filled risk, if you will. My wife's a pretty smart lady. My wife said, let's build a basket. And she wove a basket, and I got tar, and I put tar in that basket to make it waterproof. And she said, if we're going to hide our baby, what better place than on the Nile? Everybody expects crying babies on the Nile these days. Our baby's not going to stand out because our baby's crying. But we'll put him in the basket. And the crocodiles won't eat the basket. And so we made a basket. And Aaron helped, and Miriam helped. And I'll never forget that morning before the sun came up. I took that little baby in my arms for what I thought was the very last time ever. Because I don't know if this would work. I don't know where he'd end up. Maybe he would die in that basket. I don't know. And I held him as long as I could. And I kissed him. And I gave him back to his mom. And I left thinking I would never see him again. And so my wife and Miriam, they put the little baby in the basket. And did I tell you my wife was a smart lady? Because she decided that they would take the baby to a place where they knew there were young women. Because one thing she knew about young women in their early 20s is they love to pick up little babies. They can't resist little babies. And she went to where the palace was. And she knew that every day, at a certain hour, the princess would go and bathe in the Nile River. And her attendants would be with her. So they took that basket and they snuck it into the Nile River. And they hid among the reeds and they pushed the basket out. And the basket went out in the river, went downstream a ways and got caught in more reeds. My wife could hardly watch. But my little girl, my brave little girl, Miriam watched. She ran down the bank. And she hid among the reeds and she watched. And the princess and her attendants were walking along the river. They were playing, they were having fun. And they saw the basket. And they heard the crying. And sure enough, those young ladies couldn't resist. And they brought that basket over. And the princess opened the basket and there was our little son crying. And she picked our son up, and she cuddled him, and she stopped his crying. And her heart went out to him. Oh, she knew it was a Hebrew baby. No other babies are going to be in the Nile. There's no reason for any Egyptian to put their baby in the Nile. They knew. And she, I think, loved that little baby. And my daughter, not only brave but smart, she popped out and she asked the princess if the princess wanted some help with raising the baby. Did the princess want her, Miriam, to go find a Hebrew, someone who would take care of the baby? And of course the princess said yes. She wasn't going to let this baby go. Nobody in their right mind who holds a little baby and is attached to this little baby is going to say, go ahead and throw it away. And so the princess said, yes, please. Go and find someone to take care of this baby until the baby's old enough to come live with me. So where do you think Miriam went? Back home. And Miriam brought my wife. And my wife met the princess. And the princess said, would you please take care of this baby for me? And my wife, trying not to look too overjoyed, said, yes, I will care for this baby. She couldn't tell him it was her son. I came home from work. I opened the door, and there was my wife with my little baby. I couldn't believe it. We took a faith-filled risk. And God rewarded that risk. And there we had our baby. Oh, it was still hard because we knew we had to give him up, but he was alive. And he would live. And we would know where he was. And of course, you know, he was given a different name than we gave him. He was given the name Moses. But to us, he wasn't Moses. He was our own little name. And he lived. And we knew that God lived. And God lives. What happens when we take faith-filled risks? What happens when we decide the consequences of living in faith are... What happens when we take the risk of the consequences of living in faith? Overtaking the risk of not living in faith. God rewards us. He might not return a baby to you. He might not return a loved one to you. He might not return your health to you. He might not return your job to you. He might not return your money to you. But I'll guarantee you, he always returns your faith to you. He always gives you more faith. Step out. Step out in faith with God. Don't be afraid of the consequences of following God. Because a faith-filled risk will always pay off with God. He will always reward faith. So take a risk. Follow him in faith. That may have been what it was like. I don't know. But whatever it was like, it is true that God always rewards faith. And it is true that we can always step out in faith and take that risk. And he will always reward that faith. Always. So let me close in prayer, if you'll join me. God in heaven, I thank you for your words to us. I thank you that the stories that you record in the Bible are there because of the truth you want us to know about you and about us. God, I pray that you would continue to encourage us with your words, transform us, challenge us, shape us. God, I pray that you would build faith into us, and that more and more we would be people of faith. So God, may the stories that you have recorded be stories that are played out in our life and our hearts. Maybe not the same exact circumstances, but they're for today, because you are for today. So God, I thank you for this evening. God, I thank you that you're here, and I pray that you would just continue to lead us and guide us and draw us closer to you. I ask and I pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.